This is how to upgrade to a lighter 520 chain and sprockets and lightweight rear rotor using an Aprilia RSV4 RF1100 factory as the model bike. It's easy to look at this project and start with the rear wheel because it's more exposed and you kind of start thinking, well, I got to get this off and everything. But in this case, what you actually want to do is leave everything back here alone and start with the front sprocket. The reason for that is because you have to get that sprocket nut loose, and to do that, it's going to be much easier if the rear wheel is in place and held down to the ground. It's going to give you a little bit more leverage in backing off and tightening that front sprocket. So the first thing we want to do is get access to that, which means removing our cover. So I'm going to take these 3 screws out. The top screw is actually longer than the other 2 screws, so make sure to lay them out in order so that you remember which ones go where. It looks like we're going to have to take that shift arm off of there as well. All right, so I'm just going to take that little pinch bolt loose a little bit right down there. And then what I'm going to do is take the marker and I'm going to put a mark across the center of the shaft and the arm so they can see that those 2 line up when I put it back on. So maybe I have to take that loose first. There we go. There's actually a couple of O-rings and then the spacers, so get them all put in place. Got to take the screw all the way out because it's hiding in that groove. Then this comes off. Put the screw back in so you don't lose it. There we go. Okay, now the sprocket cover's off. Put that aside. There's our front sprocket bolt that we want to get off. The reason we left the rear down is because if you try to turn this with just a normal wrench, what's going to happen is it's going to turn the chain, and turn the whole wheel. Unless you have either a buddy hitting the rear brake to hold the rear wheel still, then maybe, or you can also try to pry something through here that will force the wheel to stay still up against a swing arm, but then you might damage your wheel or swing arm as well. What I use is an air ratchet because that to me is the easiest way. I can do it with less leverage back here at the tire. Make sure it's going the right way. Okay. Okay. Make sure you have all the washers that came with it. And now your sprocket is free to come off, but you have to get the chain off first. So now we've got to break the chain. I have another video that shows how to use one of these chain tools, so I won't show that detail here, but the link to that is in the description below. Now our chain is broke. So we can slowly remove that. I got to get this back in, I got to get the bike back in neutral, which is a little bit difficult because I took this off. Ugh. So I have to put this back on just gently. Okay, and now it's in neutral. So I can get that old chain off. Old chain off to the side. Now my sprocket will come off in the front. You see that? Now at this point, I'm going to put the rear stand up because I want that tire to rotate so that I can do what I need back here. Now that the rear is in the air, the next thing I want to do is change out the rear sprocket. Now this bike has already been fitted with BST carbon fiber wheels, so it's a little bit different if you have a stock bike, but the principle is the same. You get the sprocket off of there, change it to your new 520 sprocket, and I'm also going to be changing to the lighter weight rear rotor. So got to get the axle nut off. There's the nut, and there is a washer underneath, so make sure to capture both of those. I like to put a little bit of leverage underneath here. Just makes it a little bit easier. You don't have to hold the whole tire this way. Okay, and I'm going to push the pin out the other side. Make sure to support the wheel while you pull the pin out. Now, make sure you're clearing everything as far as your brakes and all that goes, and get that tire out of there. Now the first thing we'll do, because it's easy, is we'll change that brake rotor. You'll do a star pattern like any other wheel project. There's the 5 loosened. Now go ahead and just take the bolts out all the way. As I take this last screw out, what you'll notice is that you've got your encoder wheel, and this is for your anti-lock brake system and all the computer gadgetry. That's what the system uses to look at wheel rotation speed. So that's important. Make sure it goes back in the same way, which is with the dish kind of out in the middle, not that way. That comes off. Just for the hell of it, I'm going to go weigh these two to see how much weight I'm actually saving. All right, first the stock rotor, 1.7285 pounds. And then the new one is 0.929 pounds. So a little bit of weight savings anyway, and it's rotating mass, which is always good. Now we'll take our new rotor, and there was some Loctite on the bolt, so I'll go ahead and use some on this as well. I'm going to use a drop of red on each one because a brake rotor can get hot. So anywhere where I see heat applied, I'm more likely going to use red than blue. We want to put our encoder on there as well. Get them about right before they actually start touching the encoder plate. And we'll start snugging them. Star pattern again. It's a good idea to get the torque wrench out for things like this. Make sure it's done right. All right, there's that. And we'll flip the wheel around to the other side. Now, I'll just take the sprocket carrier assembly over to the bench and swap that out with the new 520. They're both super lights, as you can tell, so there won't be much for weight savings since they're very similar. All right, I took the old sprocket off, put the new 520 sprocket on. And this particular, with the BSTs, has that kind of gasket in between. Put that back in place, that's good. I've got the old rotor off and the new lighter weight rotor in place. Everything is torqued and happy, so I can put this back in place. Sometimes this rear brake rotor can be kind of a pain. Kind of visualize the win here. There we go. Always make sure you check and that rotor is between the two pads where you want it. Before I put the axle back through, put a little bit of grease around it. Now we'll line up the brake caliper. I'm going to go through the swing arm. That kind of holds your tongue right here. There we go. Have the axle through there, and it's centered in the block, and then that block has a straight edge up against the axle adjuster. Now what we want to do is start with the chain as far forward as we can so that we have room to bring it back. I do like a longer wheelbase just because it's less likely to wheelie on you, but a shorter one will give you quicker turns. So really what we're trying to do is make it short enough so that you have room as the chain stretches, you can move back in the axle blocks. Let's take a look at this new chain and make sure it's rated for the bike you have. This is a pretty high grade one. You want to make sure, especially when you're going down in size like a 520, it's a lighter construction, so you want to make sure that it's rated for something with this much power. Ooh, pretty. You can also compare this one to the old one and try to cut it about the same length, but you want to make real sure that you don't cut it too short by accident, so I'll just do it this way. All right, both axle adjusters have the antices and are run all the way in, so I can move the wheel as far forward as it'll go from both sides. Now on this particular bike, see that slot and that pin right there? It's as far forward as it can go. So even though the axle looks like it could go further, it actually can't because the brake caliper is limited. It's all the way forward. So it's all the way up, and we'll slide it back until we get the chain position right. So let's get our new front sprocket. And we're going to put a little bit of antices on that pinion shaft. Now this is exactly why it's so important to pay such close attention when you're working on bikes. This is the sprocket factory that came off the bike in that orientation. This is the new sprocket. Every sprocket, bearing, everything I've ever seen, you always install with the numbers facing out so that you can go back and see what part it is or how many teeth it had or whatever without removing it. However, if I do that, you can see the teeth are going to be offset from the stock sprocket. Now, yes, they're thinner, but they're way offset. The only way to make it work is to put it this way. You still want it about as dead nuts as you can with how it was before. So if you just blindly install something just because everything you've ever seen in your career shows you that's the way to do it, you have to check parts and make sure stuff is going to work. So that's how the new sprocket will go on, is this way. Now I'm going to take some anise and put it around the drive pinion shaft, whatever you want to call it here. Again, just like the axle adjusters, it's a good idea to have this in there just because you don't want stuff binding. And again, we're putting it on the unconventional way, but the way to get the right offset. And now for the pinion bolt. This is an engine part, so I'm going to put a drop of red Loctite on it. I'm going to just put the bolt in loosely. I'm not going to tighten it yet because I want to have the chain and everything connected to use that tire as sort of some leverage to keep it all still while I'm torquing it down. Let's see what we've got for a chain length. Now with this chain guard, it might be easier to slide it back this way and then catch it back here. Okay, and then we want to go forward around our new front gear here. And again, it's in neutral. And what I try to do is I'll get it around on the rear sprocket and then see where we want to cut it. All right, so with everything as far forward as it can be, but right there it looks like that's the pin we want to knock out. And then what we'll do is put the master link in there. So that's the pin we want to knock out. Make real sure you got the right one. Put a black circle around it. That's the one we want. So now we'll get our chain tool back and we'll go ahead and push that pin out. If we line these up, we can see right there that we have a nice spot and we can put that master link in there and off to the races. Now I want to see what the chain weighs compared to the old one just to see what my weight savings are. And here's the old one, 4.97 pounds. New chain, 4.017 pounds. And I always install these chains with the wording facing vertical, normal on the top layer. Feeding back in here again. Now to install the master link. Now that we've got our new chain on, we've got our master link properly riveted, and now we're ready to start tightening the chain. We're going to start with the chain side first because that's where the chain is. And then we'll catch up the other side to where this goes. Then I'm going to kind of hit the back tire a little bit to make sure it's all the way forward. A lot of your bikes have this gauge down here across the bottom, and it helps you see where that block is so that you can get it right visually on the other side. All right, just for a check, I measured the distance on the marks to make sure I wasn't getting confused, made sure it's the same on both sides. Yes, I know this looks ridiculous, but if you want to check your chain properly, you really need to have the weight of the gear considered. So I've got my helmet, my gloves, my suit, my boots, and I'm going to drape over the seat, as you may have seen me do in videos before, to sag the bike enough with the wheels on the ground to see what my chain slack is.
That looks good.
Now what we want to do is tighten the axle adjusters, which means I put this wrench here, and I know that I have a point facing straight outward. Sometimes you'll end up on a flat, this one's a point. So I know that that's the position I want. Then I tighten this guy. Do the same on the other side. All right, that's good. And like I said, that chain's gonna stretch a little bit. It's within spec, but it'll loosen up and I'll have to redo it at some point. Need to tighten our axle. Time to get out the torque wrench again. Okay. Properly torqued. Now we just got to do the front sprocket and put that all back together. Since I'm done back here, I'm going to lower this back on the ground so that it'll kind of have some bite against that sprocket when I'm tightening it. The kickstand down yet. All right, I'm going to tighten this guy. And that's got the red Loctite on it. So our drive system is done. Just got to put the cover back on now. I got some gunk in there I'm going to try to clean out of it. No point in putting dirty parts back on. Oh yeah, that's got to come off. There we go. We have our 3 bolts here and 6. Okay, those are done. Now, put the shift arm back, and we have our black mark that we have to remember to follow. So it goes back in the same place. If you don't do things like that, you might have problems with your quick shifter. All right, now we got this on, and the lines are perfectly lined up. Got our little side screw to put through there. And you want this outside edge flush, which should put that screw right in the groove. All right, the next we want to do is capture this one. Now remember, we had kind of this spacer and the 2 O-rings and everything to use on that fastener. The book does say it wants some Loctite. Put some Loctite in, let that dry. Okay, now you want to take the spacer and O-ring on the back side and have this O-ring on the front side. Run it through that and start snugging that up. There we go. And that wraps up the install of the lightweight 520 chain with the lightweight rear brake rotor as well. So now the only thing to do is go out and ride and enjoy it.
Subscribe to my YouTube channel below and let's celebrate turning fuel and air into adrenaline.